is a former Vancouver 86er, former Team Canada player, and a guy that knew how to put the ball in the back of the net. John Catliff. John, welcome again, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Anthony. It's great to be here again.
Pleasure is all mine. John, we had on Alex Bumbury last week, Paul Ciccarelli. Later on, we're going to have Paul Pescasola on live from England. And I wanted to have you on. You played in the Canadian Soccer League that was based coast to coast from Victoria to Nova Scotia. And I think it's time that we get our own Canadian League up and going again. Not only for players, John, but for coaches, trainers, administrative staff as well. I'd like to get your thoughts if you believe this is the time for Canada to take the plunge again.
Well, I'd surely love to see it, Anthony. I was part of the CSL, which was the inaugural Coast to Coast League, and as sort of semi-professional as that was, while it was happening, we thought it was as viable as can be, and unfortunately, it sort of unraveled in some of the problems that the Canadian-wide league faces: travel and support in small areas, and while it's a dream of both of ours, it would take some doing and some real corporate doing, I think, to defray the large costs that are involved with creating such a league. But it has been done in the past. We're 30 years on from then, and one would think that we could. And I think we both share the opinion that it's what we need to bring us out of the morass that is our national team standing in the world.
I got to tell you, John, when I worked with the North York Rockets in the early 90s for a couple of years, and Eddie Berdusko was around there and many others, there was a twinkle in the eye of many young players that were practicing very close to the facility. We would practice, and they would look up to these North York Rocket players. They'd look up to the other teams that would come in, and they'd want to wear a jersey representing their local community. This is what I believe is needed desperately for our country, for different provinces to get back.
I don't disagree with you. I think that in any league set up in the startup, there would need to be some equalization, and as there was in the original CSL. I ended up playing in Calgary my first year, just because of the disparity of the player base across the country. But once that's sorted out, and if the salaries are good enough for young players to treat it as a career that they can honestly go into, then there's no question in my mind that we'd progress up the rankings of FIFA and have a more serious shot at qualifying for our second World Cup tournament.
Safe to say, John, the last time we really had a serious shot to get to the World Cup, it came from a handful, if not more, players that came from that Canadian Soccer League. Yes,
it was, and really our Gold Cup victory was in large part due to the development of players through that Canadian Soccer League.
Let's talk about how important it is, as you mentioned, to get key sponsors on board, the corporate world. Not only that, but to get the different fan bases excited and on board, that enough talk is out there now that people actually have to put money down if they're serious for this league to go. Or else, let's be honest, John, I don't want to hear it anymore when people complain, because if you're not going to put your money down to support your local club, then don't bother talking about it anymore.
No, and I think if you take a page out of junior hockey, where there's perhaps 3 divisions or something to defray travel costs until some sort of playoff, I think there's a structure that might be able to work depending on how many cities. If it's definitely going to be second tier to the MLS, then the 3 clubs. Existing clubs in the MLS have to buy into it and probably divert their second teams or whatever to a Canadian type scenario. I think that's what would give it some impetus as well. So there's a lot that needs to be done, certainly, but it's not beyond the wit of man to get a soccer league in this country, I would think.
John, we talk a lot about the players and giving them an opportunity, giving them a spot on a different club. And I remember back in the Canadian Soccer League, there was 3 imports that were allowed on each team. And if we go around and do it this time, I would even go down to 2. But not only that, I think a lot of times, John, we forget about the opportunities that need to open up for young Canadian coaches, mature Canadian coaches that have had the doors closed on them down south. And meanwhile, a lot of Americans come up here to take GM jobs, coaching jobs, on and on. But for a Canadian to go down south, I can count on one hand how many Canadians have administration roles and coaching jobs in MLS teams. I think that is important as well.
Certainly it is, Anthony, and I think it goes beyond coaches. I look at my own situation. We had a fellow on our team called Rick Celebrini, who got firsthand knowledge and experience of physiotherapy, decided it was for him, and now is one of the country's renowned physiotherapists. There's lots of opportunity that come from the different management roles that it takes to run a club and a league. So, and coaches are certainly one of them, and I echo your sentiments there for sure.
John, just before we let you go, we really appreciate your time. I think now is the right time where we're starting to see the appetite as we saw it for the Women's World Cup here in this country, well supported. All over the world, people turned out to come and watch it. I think now's the time that different cities start lining up and saying, we want part of this Canadian League. What can we do? How do we go about doing it? And not only that, but start to gauge the interest of local youth clubs and academies to get their appetite. Because I'll be honest, I'm talking here in the Toronto area. I've heard stories as well in the Vancouver area. The MLS clubs really don't spend much time with the youth clubs. They care about themselves and themselves only, which that's fine. It's a private business. But I think it's important that these Canadian clubs think about these youth clubs and academies and make them feel part of the process.
Yeah, I think there's no question. There's lots of development issues for Canadian soccer, the least of which is what happens when you're 18 years old and you end youth soccer and sort of float for a few years at the bottom of men's soccer, not really ready perhaps to play that, but without a youth club behind you. And these clubs could fill a void there as well. There's much to do, and certainly the planning and execution of a national league would be some undertaking. But again, I think it's something that we seriously need to consider if we're serious about the sport in this country.
John, really appreciate you making time on short notice. We thank you so much, and I won't forget those days in the Canadian Soccer League, my friend. God rest his soul, Dominic Mobilio, and many others that wore that Vancouver 86ers jersey. John, thank you again for making time, my friend.